Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good morrow, wherever you may be. I am Brian Martinez, and I'm here with Aydin Paladin, and you are at the Doge and Aydin Show number 4. Why do geeky men open their subcultures to destructive ideologies? So welcome to the show, and I welcome Aydin. It's good to have you with me, and also happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me as always.
Yes. Aydin is now, she is 21 for the 7th time.
Seventh time in a row.
Seventh time in a row. It doesn't get any bigger, but it's definitely big. And speaking of which, you share a birthday with a certain someone as well. You knew that, right?
Who do I share it with?
You share, I believe. Hold on, I could be wrong.
I mean, I do know. I know that you probably don't know Knuckle Levy, but I know I share a birthday with his mom apparently because it's her birthday today.
No, I thought.
Oh, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright. Oh yeah, there you go. So happy birthday, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Well, he's dead, but other than that,
oh well.
Happy birthday.
So every time we do a Doge and Aydin show, I'm usually thinking about a question that I'd like to ask. So today's question comes from the kind of week I've been having. That's usually where my questions come in. So I'm going to tell you guys pretty much word for word the thing that I asked Aydin in a Twitter DM I sent her. This is what I wrote. I said, why do men, in particular nerdy outcast men with geeky interests, why do these men make sure that their hobby is as inclusive as possible to women, and anyone for that matter, while at the same time claiming that their hobby is not inclusive to women? Additionally, why are these men willing to be seen as inclusive to women so badly that they will even welcome women in who have no interest in the hobby, or they might even resent it? These same women will be abusive to the men, criticize their entire community for being a boys' club full of sexism and toxicity. And then, for not customizing the culture of this nerdy community around their sensibilities, will be the reasoning for their essentially attacking this sort of special interest community. Yet these men, they won't just put up with this, but they'll agree with the toxicity in their own culture, all while claiming they themselves are the only exception to the toxicity around them. And the weird thing about it is all the men will do it. Almost all the men. So it's like they're all pointing fingers at all the other ones saying, yes, these guys are the problem, without actually acknowledging the fact that they are in a consensus that they don't like that there is this problem. So You may have seen the recent happenings with Gamergate Ghosts of 2014, like Zoe Quinn is launching a new comic book under the Vertigo Comics Goddess mode, R.I.P. Vertigo Comics, where she gets to tell her her side of the story in comic book form. And Anita Sarkeesian, despite her channel running on fumes, is going to be guest of honor at Gen Con this year. Since all cringe happens in threes, according to the Dow, I am waiting to see if Brianna Wu actually becomes a congresswoman, because that would be the icing on the cake. These people
Probably
are still...
not. But maybe they'll bring her on to something so that she can be brought back into the spotlight. I'm sure.
Definitely something. She'll be at David Hogg's house when he got swatted again or something. She's gonna definitely come back into the fold. You know, these people are still considered credible. Credible despite all efforts to expose them, or at least it appears to be by the people who are trying to push them into, let's say, the greater sort of, it's like they're getting a leg up in the culture. Like, I don't think that excuse me, I'm not ever gonna see like V Monroe become like guest of honor at Gen Con anytime soon, even though he probably talks about video games and gaming more than Anita Sarkeesian does, right? So that's one of the things that and we have to also bear in mind that the people who run these things, like the people, like the guys that work at Vertigo Comics, the guys that, work at the convention scene, a lot of these people are men, and a lot of those men are also interested in this industry. So this is why I was prompted to ask the question. Anyway, so I went to my team in the research room over here at Honey Badger Radio, and I got inundated with studies, and I sent those over to Aydin to something for her to think about. So I guess I don't want to take up too much of the floor here. So Aydin, first off, is there anything that you wanted to add to what I've said so far?
Well, the thing is, and the studies you sent me, I read through them. They're critical cultural works, which is not necessarily inherently bad, but it means that they're all concerned with, not all of them. One of them you sent me is one I'd actually read before, which is the Morahan and Martin and Schumacher piece, which is, yeah, loneliness and social uses of the internet. I'd read that piece before, I've cited it even. But a lot of these critical culture things, it's about, oh, the performative aspects of gender. How do women perform in these masculine environments? And they're written from a feminist perspective. The unfortunate thing is that research such as those contain no quantitative data so that we can see things like, well, how many women are actually involved? How do women actually compete in comparison to others? Now, I happen to have a large deal of data on deck about things like this.
Ooh, okay. Go on.
So for example, this is going to be the Ben Morowitz. Oh no, that's a different one. Which one is going to be? I've got a very large research list here.
It's fine.
It's Marty, Stromer, Galley, Banks, Wu, Consalvo, and Castillo. Marty, Stromer, Galley. That's a compound. Banks, Wu, Consalvo, and Castillo. 2013. The name of the study is "Dwarf Acts Like a Lady." It was an actually mixed methodological piece that does deal with some of the more qualitative, how do people feel kind of stuff, and quantitative, and found pretty much that, well, women act more masculine when they embody masculine characters online, and men act more feminine when they embody feminine characters. Similarly, though, we've found through similar pieces of research, this is Hartman and Klimt, 2006, that people just use games differently across men and women. I'm only talking about video games right now. People play differently. People play for different reasons. People utilize games for different motives. Right?
Okay, well, let me ask. So, is this just? Did you say this was just about video games right now, or is this just games in general?
Those two were about video games specifically, but we have. Well, I guess we spoke about this before, is that maybe we should talk about what the idea of a game is in the first place.
Yes, we could do that. I think that maybe we should go into that before we go, because I think I know what you're getting at with the reasons why people play, or the way that they play the games is different, and it differs based on gender as well, right? Almost like the goals, or what you're gonna get, what you're gonna do to get enjoyment from it, are not necessarily the same across genders. And I think that is something that I've actually given a lot of thought to too, because I play video games with my wife, and well, we can go into that later, but sometimes I don't think we're doing the same thing for the same reasons, even though we're playing the same game together. And so I think that could be, absolutely. But let us get into what play is. So why don't I what is play? Because that should be the first question. What is play? Why do we do it?
So there's the original theory of basically the seminal of what we call theory of play, or understanding of play, is it's Huizinga. What's the original citation? What year? 1939. Who talks about something called a magic circle, and the idea is that play, and this includes pretty much all hobbies that involve a suspension of disbelief, which means pretty much all hobbies, all games, all of these things we're discussing, is that they occur within this magic circle. And it's called the magic circle because it's a little world in which this universe exists. Why? So let's look at a very simple example. What is, say, running a lap around a track, right? So the point is to finish as quickly as possible. Well, if I wanted to finish as quickly as possible, I could just take a step backwards and then walk back forwards. We are engaging actually in a suspension of disbelief to create and engage in these fake rules that we have collaboratively constructed. So and there is a sort of taboo that we cannot violate the game's rules or norms. This can include social norms. So, for example, there are things about sort of geeky hobbies that fall outside of the normative behavior of the magic circle. You don't cheat, and if you cheat, oh, it's a big deal. You don't. These are very basic things, and every single game, every single thing that is involved in these kinds of hobbies has its own type of magic circle. Now, there is criticism of the magic circle. I mentioned Dr. Consalvo, who has both written on it, for it and against it. But the idea is that cheating, what she posits is that cheating is a natural part of the magic circle, that we, on some level, expect cheating. So it's something you can question. Again, Huizinga's original hypothesis is 90 years old, you know, so. But generally, we still see that the general idea of rules of play. And in all of these things, when we talk about nerdy communities, we're still talking about rules of play, right? Or
absolutely.
Rules of engagement.
Yeah. There's like a it comes with its own I guess rituals and not just rules, but like for the games themselves, but rules in terms of like, you know, what are you doing when you come to the table, or when you go to, you know, sit down to engage and play. Like it's not just the rules of the game itself, but there's rules outside of those rules, aren't there? Like there's like its own etiquette, for example.
Right, exactly. But etiquette would be considered parts of the rules of play.
Yes.
And so that means, you know, for nerdy hobbies such as we would be discussing, yeah, it means that there are spoken and unspoken rules. So there's things you don't do. And even if cheating is one of them, which is, again, is Dr. Consalvo's hypothesis to sort of add to the idea, I wouldn't say that she's actually debunking the magic circle, but is rather adding to it, saying that cheating is sometimes part of the circle in its own way. The idea is, though, is that there are some things you just don't do. Or at least if you get caught, you will be ostracized, or you're going to be not well received by the community. Right. And it happens in pretty much any game, any community, any social situation that includes this idea of the magic circle.
Yeah. So, and also, just so you guys know, from something I read, and I watched a couple of videos on this, it's not just humans that do this. It's actually all mammals on some level. They have their own play. It's less sophisticated than us, like say when rats or when dogs play. But when primates play, they have a slightly more advanced version, and they also have like their own kind of magic circle. Even dogs, they have their own rules. They're not using as many tools as we are, but you know, I watch my dog go to the dog park and play with other dogs, and there is patterns. You know, it's only fair if one dog chases another for a while, and then they want to be chased. And you know, they usually only do this with dogs that are about their size, or you know, they will. They have, if there's too many on one dog, then you know that dog starts to feel overwhelmed, and they have to like split up, or somebody has to intervene. There is. Even with animals, they have like something like that, something that's sort of related to it. So what we're doing, it's way more advanced for us, obviously because of our larger brains, but this is not, like, play is not something that should be dismissed out of hand as not important to our human development.
Oh no, it's intrinsic. Oh yeah, you're right. Not only do animals do it, but it's part of our social bonding experience. And it's also important to note that what is play and not play is not, there are no strict boundaries. Some things can be pseudo play, some things can be whatever. Like it's not like this is now a game, this is now not. This is now a part of this playful behavior or community or something, and then as soon as it falls outside of the circle, I think it's part of the problem with that people have criticized the term magic circle for, is that it sort of defines it as limited and closed off, when that's not really reality. It's actually quite, yeah, we can very quickly, like when you even think about social interactions that we do every day, when you go between just talking to someone and then all of a sudden you're playing a word game with each other, and but it's not, again, the rules aren't strictly defined, all kinds of things like that. We all engage in play constantly. It's an inherent part of of our human communication, and as not just human, but yeah, animals as well.
Yeah, it's how we. Well, actually, I got this abstract that I would read out that I thought was pretty interesting. Let me read through this real quick, and I think this would give us a good idea. Play is one of the most difficult behaviors to quantify, and for this reason, its study has had a very rocky history. Social play is ephemeral, difficult to distinguish from the other so-called serious behaviors, not so frequent, especially in sexually mature subjects, fast and complex to describe. Due to its multifaceted nature, it has often been considered as a wastebasket category that has included all kinds of the behaviors not showing any immediate obvious goal. Yet, play is widespread across the whole primate order and can have a strong impact on the development of cognitive, psychological, and social skills of many species, including humans. Unlike functional behaviors that are specifically and economically performed to reduce uncertainty and to increase the opportunity to gain resources, play seems to introduce and increase uncertainty, creating new challenges for the animals. For this reason, social play has been hypothesized to be the engine of behavioral innovation in ontogeny. From the first mild and gentle interactions with the mother to the most sophisticated play fighting sessions and acrobatic action sequences with peers, play represents for juveniles, and not only for them, a window into the social and physical environment. In this review, this is the guy's abstract, that's what I'm reading. I focus on social play and its relation to adult social competence. By playing, juveniles acquire competence to manage interactions with conspecifics, enlarge their social networks, and test their physical power and motor skills, i.e. long-term benefits. At the same time, I propose that the view that play, due to its plastic and versatile nature, can be used in an opportunistic way as a joker behavior throughout life to strategically obtain short-term or immediate benefits. I put forward the hypothesis that, during ontogeny, the joker function of play can be modulated according to the differing inter-individual relationships present in the diverse societies characterizing the primate order. And in addition to that, I watched Jordan Peterson has some lectures on play, and one of the things that he talks about that I thought was very interesting is that human beings need physical contact. It's something that we've talked about, right? And he says it's about mammals in general. If you took a newborn rat out away from its mother and took care of it and tried to feed it and everything, it would still die without contact with its mother. And human beings need contact, and a human being that's had more contact with either its parents or from its parents onto siblings or peers of some kind will be better at play than ones that haven't. So if you have a baby that was with its mother for a while, but it was he was an only child, he didn't have a lot of friends growing up, it would stand to reason, yes, it would seem self-evident that as that child got older, he would have a harder time engaging in play, understanding the rules, understanding the magic circle as it's called, because there's no blueprint, there's no background to base it on. So that is the degree to which it matters. And actually, I think in their adult life going forward, the idea of rules, of working within a construct that is built by all of the people that are participating in it, without that knowledge, you can't even get by in the real world. Because I think that the social rules that we have for how you are supposed to behave out in the world, I think a lot of them come from the stuff that we learn in terms of learning our boundaries and shit as kids, growing up. I don't know if that makes sense, but those are my thoughts on that.
No, exactly. And it's actually that's true. Like, again, it's not so much that, if you, I think of the, wire mother experiments, in terms of like, yes, the animal will survive, but if it's fed by a non affiliative creature, but it'll be socially maladjusted for any social species, or for really any species that has any kind of social interaction. So yeah, and play is one of the best ways that we do it. It's interesting that in that abstract, it talked about the idea of being non-expected. And that's what we would call it, actually why we call it not so much anymore expectancy violation, but expectancy management, which is that sometimes we want things to be unexpected. And, logically, when we think about, well, we should want to be able to understand everything and put everything into a logical sort of anticipation. But it's actually fun sometimes to not be able to anticipate some things. And that's a lot of times what play is. It's why primates, for example, tickle each other. We think is that it's because it's a form, even though it appears to be a violation, it's a form of play fighting, sort of. And that's, this is how animals in some aspect, at least primates for sure, engage in this behavior that allows them to gain greater social understanding, not so much even through what is acceptable, what is also unacceptable. And so if you are someone who doesn't engage in any form, who has never engaged in any forms of play, in terms of humans as a child, you are going to have some social difficulties as you try to integrate into society, because play is the way that we do learn rules and boundaries. So yeah, play is a huge field too, like understanding play. Again, Huizinga is generally like one of the seminals on that, but it's a whole field of study of what is play, when and why and where and what, that's why it, like all things in social science, is interesting it's a thing you can delve into and basically never resurface.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so this is why play is important. Peterson gives an example. He said that his wife, she didn't have any experience with play, and he learned that after they were married, and he would like mess with her, for example, by you grab like a little throw pillow and you get ready to throw it at someone that you're fucking with, right? So you have it in your hand, you do like a 1, 2, 3, and then you throw it. And normally people get that what's going to happen. Like when you see the motion of I'm about to throw the pillow, and the other person's like, don't do it, or whatever. You're playing around. She didn't know at all. She just sort of looked at him blankly, and the pillow just hit her in the face. And she was like appalled that this had even happened. Well, it was because she didn't know that was the rule. So there was a lot of stuff that she wasn't getting, and he was trying to use that as an example. He gave another example that was really good too, but I thought, wow, I never really thought of it that way, and that's pretty interesting. So how is it that men and women do it differently? You have another paper on that? Or before we do that, I should go to the super chats, because we got a bunch of super chats. So let me read the super chats real quick. Okay, Frenchinator2 gives us $2 and says, "What does the cat penis do to the vagina?"
I saw that. Yes, I believe it destroys it.
Are there any survivors, or is it just ground zero puss? Is that what's happening? Okay. So Red Moonblade gives us $5 and says booty salads. I think he's answering the question, why do geeky men open their subcultures? I think that's the answer. So we can all go home. All right, thanks for coming. I'm kidding. Manny Fresh, although there's probably some truth to that. Manny Fresh gives us $10 and says, I know it's off subject, but are you guys going to cover Persky recall? Probably, but not today. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We're definitely looking at it. Red Moonblade gives us another $5 and says, if you come out of the shower clean, how does your towel get dirty? That will be on the next Doge and Aydin Show. We will cover that. That will be the topic. I'm going to have to get all of the academic papers for that one. And then Zaranx gives us $5 and says, Peterson's wife didn't have any experience with play, and he recounted his then future wife talking about feminism. Coincidence? I don't know. So, all right. So those are the super chats. About what?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a feminist thing or what. She probably just didn't have the experience, I would guess.
Yeah, I
Which
don't
means
know either, but go ahead.
maybe just some social oddities there in general. In terms of the differences, though, well, shit. There's all kinds of stuff. I can speak at least to what I have in front of me as information on video games, specifically as a hobby.
We can look at video games, because I'm guessing that we can talk about that, but I'm guessing that it'll probably broadly apply to other interests like tabletop games and other kinds of games. As they like, what really are the differences between video games and tabletop games and card games and other kinds of games that are usually sort of male dominated? I don't know.
Well,
Go ahead.
Generally, what we would say in terms of games research is that video games do tend to be a little bit different from something like most tabletop games, because it is harder to cheat, only in that it's usually impossible to break the game's framework, or at least easily to do so. There are many ways people can cheat in other sorts of games. However, there's research like Terlecki, Brown, Harner, Stewich, Irvin Harnum, and Machado, Ryan, Rule, and Wiggins, 2011, wow. Which is sex differences and similarities in video game experiences, preferences, and self-efficacy, implications for the gaming industry. That's in Current Psychology. That study, for example, indicates that, yes, men and women play video games for different reasons. Women tend to play them for more social benefits, and we have all kinds of information that further supports this. That men tend to be more competitive. Men want to win. Women want to be social. There's also, let's see. I always like this one. It's a very small study, but it's interesting. It's Banako and Chiaranopoulos and Angonostro, 2009. It's Avatars, Appearance, and Social Behavior in Online Virtual Worlds. It was at the Pan-Hellenic 13th International Conference. And that study was very similar, looking at the sexualization bit. And it turns out that in social games, in that instance being Second Life, if you can call Second Life a game, it's still a magic circle either way. Women want to be sexy. Women want to be pretty. Women want to be attractive. So do men, but women most certainly do. And, I think what we find consistently is that throughout all the research I have ever read on this, it seems to me to be unquestionable that women and men, of course, both play games, as we've been over. Of course we do. It's a normal part of human development. But we play games for different reasons. Women play games to enact a social behavior. Men probably play games more commonly to enact a dominance behavior. Not all the time, but women are trying to, and because women can be dominant, they're in the social situation. They're trying to get over other women socially, right?
Yes, I was gonna say women could use the social game to dominate, whereas men, it's about the winning, right? The winning, the actual, whatever the contest is, whatever the part of the game whose sort of rules are not social, but they're hard, clear cut. They usually quantifiable, exactly.
Of saying, I have this many things, therefore I win. Whereas women may have their own magic circle of their own social games. And it's not that either one is right or wrong, of course. There's no judgment statement there. It's just that women and men play games and different types of games for different reasons. So when we look at games that are, let's say, things like Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, comic books, these are all things that are, even though D&D and Magic have a social aspect to them, or any kind of tabletop game, any kind of role-playing game, has a social aspect to it, they are in many ways also very solitary hobbies. What is being a comic book fan? Is that talking with your girlfriends about comic books, or is that sitting in your room and reading a comic book?
Yeah, it's sitting in a room.
So these might not be things that inherently attract women more directly. The kinds of games or magic circle environments that seem to attract women more. Again, these are all in general and in aggregate. are going to be more social situations. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think that in contrast, men are going to be looking at more of the numerical stuff.
That would explain why, for example, in video games, I'm going to use an example. Overwatch is the most popular first-person shooter for women. Like, it's the one that has gotten the most women involved, that I understand, if I understand correctly. And they've made the game, they've sort of engineered the game so that it has a low bar of entry for certain heroes that you can play as. Mercy being the most popular character for women players. And one of the ways that I think, because obviously you need to be competent to play. However, one of the ways that I think that they use to attract players is they have all these skins. And the skins make the characters look nice in different ways. And the female characters tend to get more skins. Or at least they did in the beginning, and I think it was a way to get people drawn in. Like, for example, in Overwatch, they made a skin for Mercy, who is like the healer of the game, or one of the main ones, that makes her look like a Greek goddess.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my wife really, she saw it and she was like, I want that skin. And then basically she was like, that was like the thing that she wanted to do, you know? And it's not that she only plays it for the skins, but I think that it does have a more of a draw, and maybe it's intended like so that they can keep that female audience interested, because it's sort of like, why do girls like Final Fantasy X too? Because it's kind of part fashion show, right? I mean,
there's research on that. I actually don't have the study up in front of me too, but it is that thing where women did say, I want to say it's this one. No, it's not. Okay. I don't have it up in front of me, but it is, there is research that has definitely, that I have read, that has shown that, women tend to like the performative aspects a little bit of the game, which involve the more social thing. As for the healing stuff, it's actually really interesting. It's Ye Douche Not Yell, Nelson 2011, Do Men Heal More When in Drag, and is the name of the study. And the thing that's interesting about that is that they actually didn't find that women were generally more likely to be healers. This was an analysis of WoW, but they found that female avatars were most likely to be healers. So if women picked, most of the avatars, the digital embodiment, if that was female, it was a greater predictor of whether or not you were a healer, or was more highly correlated than if you as a person were a male or female.
Or male or female, yeah.
And so, but again, this is the gender performance stuff. So maybe men who want to enact feminine behaviors, that's what they do, is heal. But in contrast, interestingly enough, women who had male avatars were more likely to be tanks, were often very likely tanks, and acted with more. This is not the same study. This is actually now going back to one of the dwarf looks like a lady study that found that women who had male avatars and would act in more, quote, masculine coded behaviors. So they would be tanks. They would, stand up for the group. They would engage in more aggressive behavior, whereas men in female bodies would engage in more submissive behavior. So that's it's just something to consider, that at least in the context of video games, that sometimes I think the video games are a unique thing because they involve this thing called digital embodiment, which is changes the whole thing. We don't have that so much in IRL sort of gaming. So, playing Magic or reading comics.
Yeah, so
have that.
Digital embodiment, meaning that you get to embody the digital character, like you become that. You sort of like lose yourself in the character more than if you were sitting at a table playing Dungeons and Dragons.
In terms of the data that we have seen, yes.
Okay.
It's the player avatar interaction instrument actually measures this, but it'll be citation should be Banks 2014. But the idea is basically that online bodies have a very unique effect on us because it's just a different thing from some other kinds of games. That's all I'll say. Is that
that makes sense.
Other than that, though, I think generally speaking, again, men and women play games for different reasons, and most of the hobbies that we have seen, quote, come under attack, which I do think is accurate, by a lot of feminists who don't actually seem very interested in the games themselves, despite being quite welcomed. And I can only speak to personal experience because I don't have any hard data on that, nor do I think there actually are any.
No, I don't think there is either. I mean, I've spoken with women who have had nothing but really good experiences. There was a poll. There were polls conducted at conventions that asked questions about this, but it's hard to say that could be reliable enough, because not every, like when it was at Gen Con, they've done these polls where they ask you, how do you feel about women, being a part of the whole thing, stuff like that, right? And the fact is that most people don't even do them because it just gets given to you along with your goodie bag, and a lot of people didn't even do the poll. We don't know how many did it versus how many were actually there. It was a decent amount sample size according to the woman I spoke to, but she says that most people are totally fine, and if not outright excited, that women are taking an interest in the hobby and coming to these conventions. But that for whatever reason, it's not considered to be valid data according to feminist college professors that want to tell you that this is a really sexist and racist and non-inclusive hobby. So,
well, of course, but I mean the answer, like, without having anything hard to look at, I can only speak at least here from personal experience. I remember when I started to get back really big into comics. This was going to be around 2008. I read them as a kid, but they were my dad's. I never bought them. But around 2008 is when I started getting into actually buying comics myself. And I read online, I was reading all these things, even back now, it's 10 years ago, of people saying, oh, it's so impossible to be a woman who likes comic books. If you go into your comic shop, they're going to attack you. You're going to get so much harassment. And I went in and everyone was, I'm not trying to say no one else's, I mean, I'm being completely speaking from my own experience, so that doesn't invalidate anyone else's. But in all of my years of now, 10 years later, going to comic stores, I have never once been turned away in any form. If anything, people have been as I think the topic is, overwhelmingly welcoming. And have you ever seen the comic? It's a bit of a reductive thing, but it's called The Degradation of a Fan Base / Hobby.
No.
And it goes through, I'll read it really quickly if you don't mind.
Wait, let me see if I can find it. Maybe I can display it. The degradation of what? Of a fan base?
Fan base / hobby, and explains how women come in and ruin everything, essentially, which is not entirely true, but yeah.
Oh, is it just a one panel?
No,
oops.
It's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. Oh, I think I see it. Yeah, okay, so let me go ahead and drag this. I'm gonna open image, a new tab. There it goes. It's fucking huge for some reason.
Yeah.
Put it right here. Okay, so I'm displaying this for you guys. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, first panel, hobby is started by close friends and typically kept within that circle. There are guidelines within the games and everyone involved is happy to follow them. A friend or acquaintance of the original members joins the hobby and begins to play regularly. Because he is a minority in this already small group, he largely has to acclimate to the group's guidelines quickly so that he may stay in. Here's the typical tipping point. People who the original members are not familiar with begin to join due to generally the Greens talking about it IRL or in social media. Because non-original members are becoming a larger part of the group, Browns don't feel as pressured to learn the strict guidelines of the group and game. At this point, the hobby is mostly unrecoverable. Females join the vast majority, totally male hobby, in an effort to not play the game, but to attract attention largely uncontested from boys, because she is not there to play the game for the game's sake, i.e. she's not operating within the magic circle. She's bringing her own circle. Right? She's got her own magic circle. Because she is not there to play the game for the game's sake, she gives a half-ass and annoying attempt at playing the game and largely impedes the entire process. She distracts the non-core members. Finally, the near end, dude bros and alphas see the typical kind of guy that plays the game.
I'm not saying this is a perfect scientific, and actually
No.
this is just a meme, more or less, you know?
Yeah. The dude bros and alphas see the typical kind of guy that plays the game, thinks he is better than them, and feels that he could attract the girls who are there for attention. He is also not there to largely play the game, but even worse than the girl, he will likely chide and berate those who try to take the game seriously as nerds and tryhards, even though it is their community that he is entering on. At this point, the founding and core audience is so small in comparison to the mainstream later entries, they feel that the only way to keep the game alive, albeit butchered, is to casualize it and make it easier to understand. This generally does nothing but makes the game less fun for the people actually playing it for fun and does nothing for people who don't care about it. The game has become an excuse largely for people to hang out and flirt and smoke/drink or whatever the fuck. Now this is
the last panel. I saw you on yours. There's there's like 3 more, but I only have seen it up to the next one. So
I'll just read this next one. We get the idea of where this is going. Now the founders are so disenfranchised with the state of their community that they invested so much time into that they leave altogether to either abandon it or start their own, in which the cycle may repeat. What's left of the game, which was already largely ignored, will either collapse on itself due to a lack of interest, and the dude bros and girls will leave to be social parasites on some other community, or the game will continue to be casualized without the founders to the point that it hardly resembles the original game at all and continues to grow in popularity until it gains media attention, forever destroying the hobby.
Again, it's a meme, but it's quite apt, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is quite apt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that like it's always women that do this, but it's often what happens is that men want. Well, why do men want women to come and join their hobby? No, duh. That's not a really hard question, now, is it?
No.
Men want to hang out with women. Men want to meet women, and the thing that makes it an issue is that women don't have the same goals, generally speaking, in playing games. Women are looking for social stuff. Men are looking for more of these oftentimes numerical and quantifiable sort of things. That's why they create games. That's why they play these games that ultimately, again, mean nothing. All of the rules inside the Magic Circle are arbitrary. So yeah, it's ultimately, why are men actually so accepting of women? It's because they want women around. But what you do end up getting are also a lot of men who have seen this cycle perpetuate itself in hobby after hobby.
Mm-hmm. And there are men that have seen that enough that, you know, if they move, yes, they become jaded and cynical, especially when a woman comes along and says, "What are you guys doing?" The man is like, "Oh shit, am I going to have to go through this again?" And this has definitely happened. And again, you know, let's be clear. There are also women that will be involved in the hobby that will do the same thing when people who don't look like they're really interested want to become a part of the hobby. So they will. Yeah, that happens with women too. But what I'm trying to get at here is it's not even so much when women get involved. It's when essentially people get involved that don't actually have an interest in. What's the first thing in the beginning of your comic strip, okay? When the first person takes an interest, they have to acclimate themselves. They have to assimilate into the Magic Circle. They have to fit in because the other people that are in it are playing according to the rules and they're enjoying themselves. And because it's a small group of people and this person coming in is, you know, basically a minority, as in he's new and the other people have been doing it a little while. He has to, if he wants to be a part of it, then he has to assimilate into it. So he's changing himself, his behavior, his expectations to fit into the rule set and the Magic Circle thereof in order to be a part of the game. But when the girl comes later, in the same comic strip I'm talking, she doesn't have an interest in changing anything. She doesn't even have an interest in trying to learn the game that much. She just sees it as a place to play her own game, her social game, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. And again, as you said, it's not as if there are not women, because some of the most aggressive people I have ever met who get so aggressive about women entering the space are other women. Now, could you say that's because they fear the competition? Probably that's at least in part. But also it's potentially because they understand why this is happening, is that it's women trying to co-opt it under the because they know that they don't have to play the game. They can just kind of hang out. Men will accept them being within the space because of course men will accept them being in the space, which is why this whole concept of women aren't allowed to be in games is such an absurdity. Right?
It is. And that brings me to the next big thing that I saw. So I got into this Facebook argument. And the thing that I saw in it was there were men and women. When I said, okay, so, I'm sorry, let me set this up. I did a stream on my own channel about this. You guys can go watch it if you want to. It's like 3 hours long, but it's totally worth it. I swear to God, because it's fucking crazy. I had to do it. So I used to go to Gen Con every year back in the day. I loved it. I used to go to Milwaukee, but when it was in Wisconsin, and then when they moved it to Indianapolis, I used to go to that too. For basically,
I've been to Indianapolis once, but yeah.
Oh, okay. And I mean, I watched it grow. I mean, when I started going in it was like the 90s. It was like. In Milwaukee, it was pretty decent size. Like, I didn't go to a lot of cons, but it was decent size. But I was able to, get onto the exhibition floor, look at everything they had. There were some cosplayers, it wasn't really like, it hadn't blown up yet. The cosplay thing hadn't really blown up at the time. And I was able to play pretty much, I could try any game that was there. All the new stuff they were demoing, anything I wanted to get into. I got to do miniatures, I got to do whatever. But as time went on and it got bigger and bigger and more popular, and basically the gamers that were from my generation, they got married, they had kids, and they brought their kids with them. Gen Con exploded population-wise. Now it's like so many people that you can't get into any events unless you register way in advance. You can't get a hotel room unless you, again, do it way in advance. It's huge. And you're not going to get to do everything you want to do, which is...
When was the last time you went?
I want to say like 4 years ago, maybe.
That's probably about when I was. Well, it's probably been longer than that for me. I think I was around 21, so it'd been 2011, 2012, something like that I went when it was in Indy, and it was big, and I was a little bit turned off too for that reason. Couldn't get into anything. Yeah,
that was my experience, and that was actually the last time I went. What I had realized is what we started doing for the last couple of years before I stopped going was we would say, okay, we're going to try and register for some games, but we didn't know what was going to be available until the moment it went up, and you had to do it online and you had to be fast, otherwise you would lose it. But if there was nothing we could get into or nothing interesting, and we also wanted to get into stuff together, which we used to be able to do, but it's very difficult. It was almost impossible. So what we did was we'd have a backup plan. Like, okay, if we don't get into a game on this day, then we'll just get together and play our own game. And I think we were doing that for a few years, and we would still get into some games and try out some new stuff, and then also play some of the stuff that we brought. And then I think the last year I went, I didn't get into anything, and I ended up running everything or playing in a game that my friends had brought. And then I sat there and I thought about it, and I was like, why did I spend money to drive all the way down here, rent a hotel room, and do something I could have just done in Chicago? Because, I mean, like, we were just playing our games. So I said, well, I don't think I'm going to go anymore because it's gotten too big, and there just isn't enough... there's just not enough space, And that was actually why I had proposed on my Facebook page, like starting up a very small local, gaming convention that is focused on only playing games, because that was another problem I had with Gen Con, is it's gotten to the point where
everything.
It became everything. And then they also they bring celebs and they bring ex-wrestlers, and they bring all this stuff and to get people to come out.
That's the stuff that confuses me. It's like, I get it if it's if it was God rest his soul, Gary Gygax or something, I would understand it. But it's not. It's like a fucking ex-wrestler.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I'm going to come down here and play some Yu-Gi-Oh! And meet the Iron Sheik. It's like, well, I just want to, And it's fine. Gen Con, you can do whatever you want to. But the fact that they made Anita Sarkeesian the guest of honor this year, that basically told me everything I needed to know about the direction that the whole thing was going in. And so a friend of mine who I'd known for over 20 years, he posted on his page saying, Anita Sarkeesian is supposed to be at Gen Con. I have mixed feelings about this. And he's a very risk-averse person. And this is something I've noticed about gamers in general. And this is probably one of the reasons why they lay down and they take this shit, because I think they tend to be more on the risk-averse side, like when it comes to things like, actually saying what they feel about something, asserting their boundaries and saying, no, I don't think this is appropriate, I don't think that they're as likely to stand up for themselves. And I think that's how come feminist bullies can get into their space. Because here, I'll give you a perfect example of why I know this is true. All right. How long did Gamergate last? And how long did Metalgate last? And that's all you need to know, okay? So when feminists came after the gamers, we're still fighting them. We're still fighting games journalists to this day. I remember there was like something about there are games journos still tweeting out about Gamergate and attacking Gamergaters. There's more of them doing it than there are actual Gamergaters talking about the games journos. It is like they're keeping it alive, right?
Wait, did you mention this? Because I couldn't remember if you said it or if I just thought it in my head that Zoe Quinn's been brought onto Vertigo Comics.
Yeah, I did mention that in the beginning. Okay. Yeah. We did a Breaking Badger on that. Well, that's what I was saying. Like, these people are giving her a platform. And you have to consider the people who run Gen Con, the people who work at Vertigo, they actually have an interest in this hobby. Like, the Vertigo people are comics enthusiasts. The people who work at Gen Con are gamers. So there are people, and I think it's probably a good number, that are willing to let a person in that basically is either indifferent or despises the hobby. And one of the main reasons why is because it's male dominated. They just can't stand the idea that there are men getting together doing stuff without them, or without women, and they come in and they just want to wreck it. And when feminists came after the gamers, the journos turned on the audience. They turned on their customers, and a lot of the customers turned on the customers too. Like, there's there's a big divide within the actual gaming consumer base itself, where there were people attacking them or saying or distancing themselves, like, oh, I'm not one of those guys because those guys hate women and they attack them, and I saw the same thing happen in the tabletop environment. But when it came, and this is what I was getting at, when it came to Metalgate, though, when they tried to do that with heavy metal, men and women in heavy metal just said, fuck you, this isn't happening. And it didn't pick up an ounce of steam. Like, nobody, no journalists, no musicians, not enough anyways. I mean, there was probably some, but not enough to even give it an iota of credence. They just said, fuck off, and they had to back away because metalheads won't put up with that.
There are a lot of women who really like metal, who legitimately, truly like metal. And I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of women, myself being one of them, who don't like a lot of these nerdy hobbies. But again, I think that some of them tend to be, they're so solitary, they're so antisocial, they don't appeal to women. Music is always a little bit social because it involves often going to
concerts, clubs,
right. Again, not like, actually, and I think that of all of them, things like I'm actually kind of astounded it took longer for D&D to get attacked, or for tabletop gaming to be attacked in terms of role-playing games, because they are social, but they require you to be so mathematically sort of oriented. I think that's why a lot of women have been kept out, even though the fact that, I mean, there are we talked about this before with when Bill was here, which is that there are games like Vampire the Masquerade that are almost entirely social in origin.
Yeah, that is the reason why women tend to there tend to be more women in that LARP than as opposed to like sit down at the table, because you have to also understand that they want to play dress up and they engage in the social stuff, and they can also feel like sexually powerful. Like there is some women are attracted to sexual power, That's why, you know, they get into the avatars and the Second Life and all that. In fact, I mean, I think that men do too, because when they escape. Because I was going to mention something else, and I know that we're kind of bouncing around. But remember, you used to play Final Fantasy 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
I used to play
12 years.
I used to play, and I used to play Final Fantasy 11. And the first character I made in Final Fantasy 11, I got it when it launched. Like, I was there day one. Okay, where you had to like, yeah, you had to sign up through that other service. I can't remember. It was a play online. It was a pain in the ass, right? And I played Final Fantasy 11 for a few years, and my first character that I made was one of those cat girls. I mean, how could I not? Yeah, the Mithra, right?
Yeah.
And I had to, and you know, I played her for, that was my main. I mean, you had to pay extra to make another character, so I only played the one character because I didn't want to spend the money.
And there's no reason to have more than one on that game.
There was other reasons, or there was no reason?
No, there was no reason. There was no real reason.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of just wanting to mess around, there was no, or have a something to sell items on. There was no reason.
Yeah. So, and I, you know, there were, when you came to the cat people, they were only female at that time. I know that 14 made a male version, but in 11 it was like, if you were a cat person, you were always a girl, and if you're one of those other guys, I forget what they were called, but they were like the big guys, those were all male.
Galka.
Yeah, the Galkas, right. And anyway, so I was playing a female character, and even though I wasn't intending on it, I did take a lot of pleasure in the sexual power that I had, because I did have it, even though it was clear there was no reason for people to believe that I was male. I mean, I'm sorry, that I was a female player, because if you play a Mithra, they're all female. So, you know, I assumed that every Mithra I met in the game was probably a dude, because I played her for the statistical bonuses and because I like cat girls, you know. So
yeah, I at least saw on my server, they did back many years ago, they did at least, this is not an academic survey, but it was a survey of the gender breakdown of Mithra players, and it's like 90% guys. I mean, the game in general is it's a game, and at the time, you're talking about 2003 or something, 2004. Yeah, sorry, the game's in general 90% guys, but
for
Mithra,
sure,
yeah, you know,
for sure. But there was some things I observed about both the way that I was interacting. I didn't think about it at that time. I was just playing the game. But when I look back on it is when I think about it. Like, I observed the way that, you know, I would play my character differently. Like when I played with people that wanted to do like the sort of like the RPing, like with text and stuff, I would try to put myself in her headspace and like play out like I was a cat girl, right? And I would get, people treated me so nicely too. Like, I would get into groups for sure, you know, especially if I acted cute, and it worked. I mean, it wasn't something I was trying to do, but I just noticed that I would get into groups quicker than my friends would, you know, and I would actually be the person, like when my friends would all come online and we'd all try to get into a party together because there weren't enough of us to start one, I would be the one that would go out and try to find parties, and then people would take me in and I'd say, can I bring my friends? And because I was the girl, it would work every time. So there was actually, I don't know. It just, I don't know if that's, again, this isn't, I'm not citing any studies here.
It's called, it's Marty Strummergalley, it's Marty Strummergalley, Banks, Wu, and Consalvo, 2013 study is called The Strategic Female Gender Switching and Player Behavior in Online Games. Guess what they found? That men who played these female avatars acted in hyper feminine ways and expressed that they received benefits from it. Men who play female avatars are more likely to jump around and use emojis and emoticons, well, you know, that kind of stuff, to be very, very social. I did
the little cat face emojis where you do like an equal sign and then like the up arrow and then I did that. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. But that's the whole thing, is that this is why video games are kind of a weird thing, because they allow us to in some way escape our physical bodies. So we're doing a little bit different from how we would behave in the physical the physical environment, in which we don't have the ability to gender switch, which we do in online games. But yeah, ultimately I think that the answer is fairly simple in all of this, which is that You know, there are opportunists, as there always will be, and a lot of what we find here are opportunists who are often women, although not exclusively, who see an environment of essentially men that they can socially game with, right? And but their game is very different from the game being played, right? Their game is a sexual one. Their game is a social and attentional one. They're, again, they are in a different they're in now a what's it called when two circles, those
Venn diagram.
It's a Venn
diagram.
We've entered the Venn diagram of the magic circles, and I think that's essentially what's happening every time you see something like this.
Yeah, and when people like the opportunists like Anita and Zoe come into a space, whether it's comics or, you know, Zoe was developing a video game based on Chuck Tingle's books, you know, like a dating simulator or something that still hasn't come out yet. Shocker, she doesn't finish anything she starts. And Anita's going to be at Gen Con, you know, for example. They are also playing a kind of game, but it is in no way overlaps with the general you know, the game, the sort of, it's all like the larger magic circle, as it were, that the people who tend to go to conventions specifically because they're interested in what is happening at the convention because they're gamers and because they have an interest in the hobby. Her circle doesn't have anything to do with that, but they want to believe that she really cares, because I think I would guess, this is what I would guess. I would guess that gamers or these kinds of like nerdy guys, they may be maybe a little bit more prone to wanting to please women than the average guy does, or at least, and they're not necessarily getting feedback from women within the culture itself that's telling them that that's not necessary. Like, for example, I think about the Metalgate thing, and yes, there's definitely a lot of girls involved, you know, with heavy metal because it's just a music genre, and these women will probably be very vocal because the actual culture itself, or the game of, you know, getting involved with heavy metal music would sort of expect that people are going to be outspoken with their views. So you're going to hear a lot of female voices saying, feminists get out, or at least we don't want anyone telling us what to do, like authoritarianism get out, you know, more broadly. And so the men within that will see that the women are not for it, and so they'll just sort of like echo that and say, okay, well, the women say there's no problem, so there's no problem, so fuck off, right? But in gaming, I think that because the larger audience in general is sort of risk averse and they tend to avoid confrontation and stuff, so they probably won't speak up about what their real thoughts are. And so when Anita comes to these things and she criticizes the whole you know, culture, then not only will they be less likely to speak up about it, but I think a lot of them will probably say, oh, you know what, that's probably true, because maybe they see her as an authority and they don't question it because no one else is doing it, and it sort of like takes somebody to stand up and say no, you know, and then other people have to echo it. They're probably more likely to say, well, it must be true. And that's the weird thing in the argument that I had online, was I asked these people, when they were saying, no, Anita's voice is absolutely necessary because there's a lot of toxicity and misogyny and racism in tabletop gaming culture. And I said, where are you seeing this? Like, I think that gamers are probably some of the most inclusive people. What were you going to say? Because you said,
look at how they have ignored the voices of every woman who's actually involved in the hobby. Of all of these things, because we are a minority. There's not a whole ton of us for all of the reasons that we have described here. Why there's less women involved who are truly involved. You know, it, again, as with all things, these are aggregates and averages. There are some weird women who like the more numerical kind of stuff. It's why there's female mathematicians and engineers. Of course there are, but it's just different things drive different people, and on average, yes, women are not going to be as drawn to these kinds of hobbies. And every single time in every community that I have been in you know, Gamergate, Comicsgate now, I wasn't even involved with Warhammer, but still watching that happen. So the general thing that's happening in tabletop gaming, Magic has been completely fucked. And all of these hobbies that I have had for pretty much my entire adult life, no one listens to my voice. And it's like, hang on a second. All of these feminists want to come in and speak for me. Well, that's because they don't have any actual interest in the hobby. So I'm not saying like my voice should be heard. I'm saying, well, I've seen this happening for years now. That the three women that, well, not three, the you know, the minority of women who are legitimately into the hobby aren't listened to at all. And for a bunch of feminists, you're not doing a very good job of listening to women's interests now, are you?
Or minority women, for that matter, of which this is a clear example. I got some super chats, and there's something I want to share with you that I think is a really important possible consequence of what we're talking about. So let me get these super chats, because there's a bunch that I got in here. All right, so wait, hold on, Yobi Axis, the anti-MGTOW, says, at Aydin Paladin, and just gives us a bunch of alien heads. I don't know what it means, but
yeah, he's a crazy person. That's all.
I want to believe. The rightful king of Finland gives us €2 and says, at Aydin, what is the most common male power fantasy?
I don't know if there is. There is a list. I know I've been through them. Like White Knight is one of them. There's all kinds of them, and by that I mean real White Knight, like the actual, you know, savior complex tends to be common.
Yeah, save the whammons, or just save anybody.
Save anybody.
Protect the weak. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, I think that that's part of it too, because, you know, we're looking at a group of people that like to play games where they become people that they don't feel like they can be in real life, right? Like men, men who are, you know, relatively healthy and are sporty and athletic, they will, you know, more likely, not that there's no overlap, not that there's no like fit, you know, role-playing game guys, but they're more likely to do different kinds of games. They'll go out and actually play physical games. And guys that go to these sort of conventions, they may not have the physical ability. A lot of times, you know, they're less healthy, they're disabled, they're overweight, they have various physical issues, or they're just kind of lazy and they're just not interested in that, or that's not where they get challenged. Yeah, or they have social issues. Yeah,
that make the isolated hobbies more attractive.
Yeah. Or they're on the spectrum, and so they use the part of their body that they do feel strong with, and that might be their brain, which is probably why they take an interest in things like, you know, the strategy and tactics involved in playing a miniatures game or a card game, the ability to, you know, do all the math that's required to play some of these games, like the tabletop stuff, and that is where they get their enjoyment, the crunching of the numbers and the figuring out of the rules, you know, that why they might get into chess. Because chess is a game where the really smart people, you know, tend to play, for example. And so, but they also play these games where they get to pretend to be, you know, a knight. And so maybe they want to, like, they want to be the hero, and that this is a way to do it. There might be an urge to play that out in real life. Maybe that's where they get that savior complex from. I don't know. It could be one of the places. I wouldn't dare to play armchair psychologist, but. Frenchinator 2 gives us $5 and says, the Marxist professor said you have no friends, so who are you talking with? Also, you have a waifu stapler. Remember, because other people know you. That's a reference to the stream I did. I had an argument with a Marxist professor who works at DePaul. He actually celebrated in a long post that he put, I think it was an article somewhere, where when Milo Yiannopoulos got kicked out of DePaul. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
He actually works at DePaul, and he celebrated that, and Karen got into an argument with him under his article over that, and he ended up blocking her or something. And I actually I'm friends with a guy who's friends with him, sad to say. So he also tried to come after me, and he got wrecked, but that's a whole other story. Merc gives us $10 and says, just feeding the badger, ignore me. Thank you, Merc. I'm not ignoring you. I see you. Sarathis.
Well, he can say hi if you feel so inclined.
I will cut you Welsh thought.
Sarathis gives us 400 huffs. whatever that is. More tomboys in gaming to ward off normie whammons. Yes, please. Master Rogue, $20. Thank you, man. He says, hi, Doge and Aydin. I met a girl who said she was into geek culture, but when I pressed her on, she said, quote, I'm not that into geek culture. I couldn't help but think, you're not into geek culture, you must want points. Well, it's a different game. Points is a good way of putting it, you know?
Yep.
It's a different kind of game. And I mean, you know, I'm not gonna
exactly.
fault a girl for wanting to do that. But
yeah, she's just playing a different game from you. She has a game that she's playing, and it's just not the one that you are, or that any of your friends are.
Exactly. Red Moonblade gives us $2 and says every 2 seconds someone trusts a thought. Probably way more than that. I bet it's like parts of a second. Eval79 gives us $9.99. Thank you, sir, and says, did you guys talk about Star Wars fans boycotting the new Han Solo movie? One of the reasons for the boycott was to get feminism out for the new movies. First Star Wars movie to lose $80 million. No, we didn't talk about that, but that's a good example too. That you know, the blowback is starting to happen for sure. I don't know that people boycotted it. I think that people just didn't want to see it. I don't think that's the same as an organized boycott. I think people were just like disinterested. They were just like, this movie looks like shit. I don't want to see it. I know that's the camp I was in.
Yeah, there was an organized boycott, but I think, yes, the majority of people said, oh wow, you switched directors like 80% through the way of production, and your lead actor had to have acting lessons 80% of the way through production. And I don't care about watching a solo movie about Han Solo. He's a cool character, but why is he great? What is the best moment with Han Solo? Where he runs up. No, when he runs up to Luke, and grabs him when he gets out of the X-wing, and actually apparently says Mark, you know, in the original cut. No, I mean really, like they had to edit it in post because he grabbed him and said Mark and instead of Luke, and you know, that's Han Solo. That's a great Han Solo moment. But Han Solo is defined by his relationship to the other characters. You just killed him off. You've killed him off, and you shit on the Star Wars legacy. So no one wanted to see this piece of shit. I don't even know how bad it is. I haven't seen it. I've heard it's actually okay. It's just boring. But,
yeah, I haven't seen it either, but I mean, my understanding is at the end of the day, and if you haven't seen it, Aydin, you should check out this guy channel. His name is Mauler. He does these like great
Okay. So I actually watched that. So I
yes.
Hour-long breakdown of it. Yeah.
Yes. His unbridled rage. Yeah. So he basically puts it succinctly, and I said this to my friends after I think the last movie I saw in the theater was Rogue One, and I was like, I don't want to watch any more of these. I said these new movies are not only killing the future of Star Wars, they are killing the past of Star Wars, and they're even killing things that you didn't think they could kill. They managed to kill the Millennium Falcon in this last movie. So just let that sink in. The degree to which they ruined it is like so. That's true. It's dead, guys. It's dead. It doesn't matter how good Episode 9 is going to be. This is a dead franchise. It's over.
They did, in fact, manage to make the Millennium Falcon a feminist.
Yes, exactly. That's...
Well, whoops.
Why? So, yeah, that's it. It's dead. So... going back to this, so this is one thing that I want to point out, because this was something I was trying to get across to people when I was arguing with these male feminists and female feminists in the thread regarding Anita coming to Gen Con. And this one man who he only posted after he saw this long argument this debate that I was having with people, and he said, for some of us with non-typically functional brains, like those on the autism and ADHD spectrum, things like this always create angst and fear in me. So he is a person that's on the spectrum, and he gets extremely anxious with these kinds of arguments that we were having. We were just having an argument through text on Facebook, and it actually, I never got really angry. The other people got angry with me, like they were calling me all kinds of names, and they didn't know who I was, but they were getting really angry. They thought I was trolling them. I was straight up just replying and asking questions and giving them arguments and telling them when they didn't have arguments. I learned that from the Molly meme, and when they didn't make arguments, I pointed it out, you know, and they could not stand it. So this guy got really anxious, and he says, because like Joe, I'm just using Joe as a, this is not the person's name he's talking to, but that's the name of the guy who originally posted. I've had women accuse me of doing things in the past where I cannot understand how the actions were possibly interpreted in this way. So he's saying that he's been to conventions where women have accused him of doing things like that they consider to be harassment, and he had no idea that that was happening. He could not understand how his actions could have been interpreted as harassment. It cost me employment in the acting industry many years ago, and on a personal level, it was very, very humiliating. It also caused me to question and examine every single action I do, which sounds good until you are paralyzed with inaction and indecision because there's no way to avoid a situation where you're not second-guessing yourself. And then there's the very harsh reality that women do indeed experience the kind of harassment and degradation that Anita goes through, which by any measure or standard of decency is wrong. Now, I don't agree with him on that, but I think that he is, I think it's important for me to read the whole thing and then I'll respond to it and let you comment on it. I think Anita is speaking at Gen Con, or I think Anita speaking at Gen Con is a good thing, but I'm not going to Gen Con and I won't be in a position where I constantly have to question myself as to whether a statement made in banter with a friend could be overheard and reinterpreted into hostile, misogynistic points. I try to speak and act decently and respectfully with people, but are the consequences that can occur where such statements are evaluated by the hearer independent of the intent of the speaker, are those consequences worth this potential cost? Or those actions, rather. My head and heart tells me that Anita has a message that needs to be spoken, but the pain of previous experience and the real desire to avoid being in similar situations, regardless of my intent or actions, makes me want to stay home. Now, I don't know what the data would be on this, but I would bet that there is a pretty substantial number of gamers that go to these conventions that have atypically functioning brains. They have they have some level of autism or ADHD or something, or social anxiety disorders of some kind, right? And just the idea that Anita could be going to this to talk about something like this. See, I think the consequences of doing that are bad in a couple of ways, and this is why I was trying to make this argument. First of all, we talked about how, and I know that Aydin made a video on this, about how video games don't have the same kind of effect on people that the media often tells us that they do, right? Like there were studies recently that talked about how, you know, sexualized characters in video games actually reduce, you know, like instances of or like the desire to see women as sexual objects.
Yeah, we always get conflicting data on that, but the general consensus is that it doesn't have any long-term effects. If it has any, it's very temporary, and you have to look at what it's related to. Is that it's so highly correlated to personal self-efficacy, meaning that if you feel bad about yourself and then you play a game with a sexualized body where it in some way makes you feel bad because you report it makes you feel bad, well then you feel worse because you already had low self-esteem. Wowee, what a surprise. Yeah, I'm just saying it's not good. They're not. It's not this epidemic.
No, and of course this also extends to the violence. Violent video games don't make people violent in the same way. However, and this is something I think that you said this. When a woman like Anita Sarkeesian goes to a convention, or she's like spreading her message and she's telling other women that they are in constant danger from all the men around them, like when you get messages from what are supposed to be considered to be authorities on real life fears that you should be having, I think that those actually do have an effect. Like the media telling you all kinds of crazy shit in the news does have an effect on people. Isn't that something that has happened?
It's potential. It's more possible for something that's more. It's you could kind of call it a cultivation effect. So
Mm-hmm.
cultivation effect or cultivation theory basically says that if you listen to a lot of media, and you can keep saying it over and over and over again, then yeah, you will end up with potentially, not in everyone, but people who are large media consumers may end up with the perception that reality is more negative than it really is. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that Anita and her ilk do is potentially skew perceptions of reality. When in actual reality, we know for a fact that we cannot find any evidence that video games are directly correlated to violence. Are they correlated to aggression? Yes, but that's because they're also correlated to arousal. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff that can have a negative effect. I don't know if it's any more negative than what's his name, the Floridian lawyer who got disbarred,
Oh,
Jack Thompson. Jack
yeah,
Thompson.
yeah, Jack Thompson, yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah.
has a potential for the cultivation effect. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that those are Anita's goals. So, or at least those are what is likely happening. Because this man, I don't think that his accounts are atypical. So he has basically felt as though because he is on the spectrum, when he interacts with women, he has been accused of being of harassment or sexual impropriety or making them feel uncomfortable or otherwise, made him feel like he was overstepping some boundary. And he didn't. He tries to remain very conscious of it. He tries, to work very hard not to do it. The problem is that the boundaries appear to be so broad and so sensitive that it's probably really easy for him to cross it without understanding that he has. Now, it's possible that he really did because we didn't get any specifics. But I think that Anita's rhetoric that this is just the nature of this culture, this subculture of gaming, for example, that is not going to do him any favors because now he doesn't want to go to conventions anymore because he doesn't want to be around women because he doesn't want to potentially upset them. And at the same time, I think that it may actually affect women that are, maybe they were kind of interested, but then they hear, it's sort of like if you hear, that I don't know, like if you hear that if you go to a certain other kind of convention, like an anime convention, that all of the men there are pedophiles and they're only interested in lollies, then if you go there as a parent and you've heard that and you bring your little girl, dressed as Sailor Moon and she wants to take pictures with people, or there are guys that are like, can I take a picture of your daughter? You're going to get this picture in your head that he's like doing it because he's a pedophile, or at least there's the seed has been planted. And I think we're looking at the potential negative effects. Like it will create a massive divide in the hobby itself, in this community, if it hasn't already.
Well, it reminds me of what was one of those big flashpoints a couple years ago where that one feminist got into an elevator with some guy.
Oh, Elevator Gate?
Yeah.
That was Rebecca. That was Rebecca Watson. Yeah,
Right.
was yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that I would imagine that very realistically that would keep some men from wanting to engage in the hobby as well.
Just
Again, it's as
simplistic
here, and reductive as that meme comic was. It really does describe what happens, because what ends up happening in the end, the core people leave. The people who came into it for social or for other reasons end up becoming bored with it at some point because they didn't have any interest in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is a potential that's happening here with a lot of hobbies. Yeah, but I also think on the flip side, a lot of people ultimately, all of this is a financial game, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, for conventions and for sellers. So if Gen Con sells less tickets because people say, I feel uncomfortable with Anita Sarkeesian being there, because we know she's a bully, we know that she has harassed people like Boogie and Sargon and all kinds of people, regardless of your opinions on any of those people, that she has publicly attacked members of the crowd, not to mention her own fellow panelists, right? So we know she's not a good actor. And that would be someone that, particularly if you're a little bit socially awkward, that you would not want to be around. that you might want to avoid that entire convention now
Yeah.
because you don't want to be in trouble. So ultimately, though, I do think this money talks and bullshit walks. So I do think maybe they're going to do this, but I think Gen Con, as you and I mentioned in the beginning, how crowded it was.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if giving Anita Sarkeesian a featured guest spot will maybe be correlated to slightly decreased participation this year.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that Anita is only going because her channel is like running on fumes, and she needs to make money. Nobody's watching her videos.
500 views on most of them.
Yeah, she's basically like dead in the water, and she's trying to get out into the real world to essentially shill for victim bucks, and I think that's what she's going to Gen Con for. And she's also trying to broaden her horizons, like didn't work in video games. Okay, where do I go? I'll go to tabletop. That looks pretty big, and we'll have to see how it goes in the long run. I don't think it can last, but it's irritating that I'm watching her attack something that I hold dear, and but more than that, and it was the reason for my question, that all these men are willing to just lay down and take it, and not only take it, but be glad to and feel like they deserve it. And I think that really what it comes down to is we've gone to the point where we're going to have to wrap it up. But we're going into territory of one good man syndrome, which we've talked about on the show. And that's kind of where this is coming from. But basically you have women coming in, or people in general, that are playing a different game than the ones that are in the space already. And there's no understanding or clear-cut boundaries that establish why this is happening. It creates some divide, and the men are white knighting for the women that are doing this while they are destroying their hobby, and they're okay with it because they think that the other men, not them, deserve whatever happens, and they think that they will be safe when in fact they're just going to be caught in the blast radius, basically. So I got a couple more super chats, Aydin, and then we can go ahead and close it out. So Fretchinator 2 says Solo like Casino Royale 1967, different directors and bad actors. Said Garcia gives us $5 and says what kind of games though? Online games definitely increase aggression, but what about single player games?
The data on that are completely consistent. Here's how it works. Playing a game that's challenging increases arousal. Arousal increases aggression. The way we measure aggression is shit. We do things like whether or not you're more likely to blow air in someone's ear. Because we can't otherwise. It's unethical. So it just makes you it makes you hype, So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it makes you hype. I've been hyped. I've been there. You get the adrenaline going.
Yeah,
Hoki Bukisa gives us $4.99 and says, that's easy because please touch my pee-pee. Fretchinator 2 gives us $2 and says, don't do what, Aydin? The kid picture? I don't know what he's talking about.
I don't know what that means either.
I saw someone, this wasn't put in as, it wasn't a super chat, but I'm going to respond to it really quick. Someone named Felicia Bryant made a comment and says, at Aydin Paladin, was feminism ever a good thing at any time in history? People are attacking first wave feminism in the chat. Help, I am being dogpiled in the comments.
I don't want you to be dogpiled. I'm sorry about that. My opinion would be that feminism, such as it is and always was a mistake. That women had a role in history that was equal it was separate but equal, I guess, which is a terrible way to say it. But women had a role that made them happy. Women were not, as long as women are capable of doing things that they want to do, I think that's fine. But I think that the extent to which we have gone is absurd, and that women and men would both be happier in average and in aggregate if we had not experienced any wave of feminism.
Okay. Also, Felicia, I will also answer your question. I would say it was never necessary, and there are very good reasons for it. This isn't. I'm not going into jank territory, like I don't want women to have the vote, but even the vote is not as simple as you have been told. So here's what I would suggest that you do. I would suggest you go to Honey Badger Radio. Yes, this is a shameless self-promotion, but we do have the answers here. All right, do a search in Honey Badger Radio. Look up Fireside Chat Bob Lewis, Fireside Chat Christy O'Misty, and Fireside Chat John Davis. All three of those, we talk about the history of feminism and why it was never necessary. And in fact, it was only destruction. And it has a history of racism and all kinds of other fucked up shit. But the version that you're being sold is not the real history. That's all I'm putting out to you. It is not that simple. And lastly, you do not have to be a feminist to care about women's issues. You don't have to. So go check them out. Christy O'Misty, John Davis, and Bob Lewis. Bob Lewis, because he wrote the book, The Feminist Lie. It was never about equality. It's a good book. So look at those things and then get back to me. Be sure to subscribe to our channel also. So, Aydin, before we go, once again, happy birthday. Thanks for coming on. And do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
Well, real quick, the forced meme for 5 says SJWs are coming after Warhammer 40k, and their heresy will not go unpunished for the Emperor. I agree, and yes, they are doing that. Do I have any other final thoughts, though? Not really, other than myself, of course. Shit, that was a bad joke.
I got that.
Grown.
Speaking of thoughts, you should see the drawing I made for Aydin as it's basically a thought.
It's really nice. It's very nice.
Yes.
But no, no, not really. I think we went through and discussed theory of play. We discussed why men and women play differently, and how why we see this sort of oddity and how it plays itself out. It itself plays out.
What we need is for guys to stand up to women. So that's kind of like where I guess I'm getting with that. But what do you think would be the necessary approach? What do you guys think about our discussion? Tell us in the comments section. I look forward to seeing it. I got another super chat here from the Spence Fencer for $5. He says, Aydin, it's not separate but equal for men and women. It's different but complementary.
Perfect way of saying it.
Yes, it is a good way of putting it. We are not the opposite sex. We are the complementary sex. Yes. So I want to thank you guys for joining us on the show. I want to see your comments in the low bar. I love to see what you guys have to say about our discussions. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Doge and Aydin Show. And we will see you again in 2 weeks with something new. I'm thinking about going into the One Good Man complex. But I don't know if you're familiar with that, Aydin, but that's...
Yes.
Okay, good. So maybe we'll look at that in depth, because that's kind of where this whole thing is coming from. Also, tell me what your experiences are. If you're a gamer, if you have an involvement with some kind of a geeky hobby, and if you've noticed the feminist encroachment or at least social justice stuff, and whether or not you think it has any grounds whatsoever. I don't think it does. So, French Honey Badger gives us $5 and recommends you should watch Karen Straughn's video, Me, a Feminist, No Way. That's actually my first red pill on this topic, but I want you to go to HBR, because come on. So with that said, I have been Brian Martinez. Thank you for joining us on the Doge and Aydin Show. And Aydin, would you do the honors?
I would say Alt on a Volt.